Look, I'm very sympathetic to the people whose lives were impacted by the lawfare of the Biden administration. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were essentially ruined. They were dealing with years of litigation. I mean, went into massive $100,000 debt.
People
who were associated with him. I'm
talking
about people who worked with him in the administration who couldn't get jobs, were blacklisted after. So I'm very sympathetic. Like Hope Hicks, people who couldn't get jobs.
Hope Hicks was never charged with anything.
Please like, subscribe, and share. In today's video, Abby Phillip clashes with Lydia Moynihan on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as tensions rise over Donald Trump's proposed $1.7 billion compensation fund linked to January 6th investigations. Abby Phillip questions the ethics of using taxpayer money to benefit Trump allies, while Lydia Moynihan defends the proposal during this heated CNN debate over corruption, accountability, and political favoritism. Let's dive in.
Tonight, an unusual proposal from the Trump administration that critics are calling absurd, extraordinary, and outright corrupt. According to ABC, Donald Trump is expected to drop his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS in exchange for the creation of a political slush fund for MAGA allies who were investigated by President Biden. Now, the $1.7 billion weaponization fund for MAGA allies would get out ahead of a judge potentially just dismissing Trump's IRS case, and it would be paid for by taxpayers, according to the New York Times. For months, Trump World has explored the concept of a compensation fund for allies who incurred legal fees during those Biden-era investigations of Trump, and the money would be made available to the nearly 1,600 people with charges related to the Capitol riot. According to ABC, final terms of the settlement will not be set until they are officially announced. This is on several levels a pretty extraordinary thing. And I think just to understand why we're even talking about this, one thing you've got to know is that the case that Trump has against the government for the IRS might be thrown out simply because he runs the government. And for obvious reasons, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for his own Justice Department to decide whether or not he gets a massive multi-billion-dollar payout. So instead, they're going to create a $1.7 billion fund to potentially compensate pardoned January 6th rioters? How does that work?
Look, I'm very sympathetic to the people whose lives were impacted by the lawfare of the Biden administration. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people whose lives were essentially ruined. They were dealing with years of litigation. I mean, went into massive $100,000 debt.
People who
were associated with him.
I'm
talking about people who worked with him in the administration who couldn't get jobs, were blacklisted after. So I'm very sympathetic. Like Hope Hicks, people who couldn't get jobs.
Hope Hicks was never charged with anything.
No, but I'm saying the lawfare, the people who had to spend years of their lives in response. I'm very sympathetic to that.
She was held accountable for upholding an insurrection, so people wouldn't hire her?
People who happened to be working in the administration to defend America and do what they thought was best.
Private employers decided
their lives
to hold
were upended.
But
also, I'm very sympathetic to
I don't think she's a great example because Hope Hicks was hired, okay? She was hired in private sector jobs after leaving the administration. She's fine.
My point is I'm very sympathetic to those people. I don't know that this is the mechanism to right that wrong. I think there's a lot of questions about how the funds will be allocated and how it's actually going to be.
I think this puts Todd Bland.
Please like, subscribe, and share. This debate highlighted why so many Americans are uncomfortable with taxpayer money being connected to political loyalty. A proposed $1.7 billion compensation fund tied to Trump allies and January 6th investigations raises major ethical concerns, especially since courts already exist for people who believe they were unfairly prosecuted. Critics argue that creating a separate, government-backed fund for one political movement looks more like favoritism than justice. Accountability is also a major issue. More than 140 police officers were injured during the Capitol attack, and multiple participants were convicted of violent crimes, obstruction, and assault. Even if some individuals were treated unfairly, critics say combining everyone into one large reimbursement program ignores the seriousness of that day and forces taxpayers to fund relief connected to an event many Americans still view as an attack on democratic institutions. There are also concerns about conflicts of interest surrounding the timing of the proposal, especially with ongoing legal battles involving Trump and the Justice Department. That has fueled skepticism about whether political influence could affect normal legal oversight. Beyond politics, the numbers themselves are enormous. The proposed fund would exceed the annual budgets of many federal oversight programs. Yet there are still major unanswered questions about eligibility, transparency, and safeguards against abuse. At the end of the day, this debate goes beyond left versus right. Whether someone supports Trump or not, many Americans believe government money should never be distributed based on political loyalty without strict oversight, transparency, and equal legal
from
standards.
North Carolina has said that he is iffy on pushing forth his nomination if Todd Blanche doesn't admit that the people at January 6th committed a crime. So I think being a part of this fund, it'll be interesting to see how the Justice Department is able to get Todd Blanche forward if this moves forward with the January 6th.
Yeah, I'll say on the surface, I mean, it smells bad when you hear this and you read the stories. But I would make 2 points. First, in the New York Times version of this story, they claim that this fund is being fast-tracked. But then at the same time, twice they say that nothing has been improved, nothing has been finalized. This wouldn't be the first time that stories like this pop up about the administration, something leaks out, it's kind of trial ballooned, and then nothing ever comes of it. The second point is, I do believe that people in this country who are wrongfully accused, wrongfully prosecuted, are eligible for restitution. I'm not saying every single person that we're talking about here should get it. I don't think all 1,600 rioters on January 6th should get a single dime or cent out of this. But if there are people who can make a case that they were wrongfully prosecuted, wrongfully targeted by the Biden administration, then they should have some restitution, just like any other American.
That's a generic statement that I think sounds good if you don't pay attention to the details of what we're actually talking about here, which is that these are all people that Trump has already, through an official act, suggested were wrongfully prosecuted. The president is then now saying, potentially, that they're going to create a fund that would allow those very people. There's no mechanism for distinguishing the pardons of cop beaters from anybody else, right? They're all pardoned. They could all be, why would they not all be eligible for this fund?
Can I just say, I want to say very genuinely, I appreciate Lydia and Pete, you all acknowledging how bad this looks. I think it's important that Republicans, that conservatives call this out. My second challenge to you will be, what are you going to do about it? Because I can just tell you, Donald Trump does things like this all the time. He creates these tests for folks like you.
Again, this is still a hypothetical.
Okay.
It hasn't happened.
Let's say hypothetically $1 billion slush fund paid by taxpayers is created. I hope that you continue to use your voice the way you do. And I hope that Republicans in elected office take a cue from you and actually do their job, hold them accountable, do the oversight. And if they don't do the oversight, it's going to be part of the reason why they are not in office come this November.
Is that a challenge to Todd Blanche?
I think so.
Does it need congressional approval? I think that's a little tricky.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, we don't know all the details, right? We don't know the details. We don't know what conditions will be placed. We don't know if you have to apply. We don't know any of that. So it's all literally hypothetical.
To be honest, I guess my point is, really, does it matter? If we're talking about
details always matter.
No,
absolutely.
if we're talking about a specially created fund for people that the president has determined for whatever reason were wrongfully prosecuted, and honestly, mainly because he thinks that everything that was done by Biden was wrong, does it really matter whether you have to fill out an application or not? I mean, isn't the principle this should or should not be happening? I mean, do you think there's any world in which
it's probably going to be litigated, just like everything this administration does. But
do you think that in any world this should be happening, period? Because there are mechanisms. If you have a grievance against the government and you're just a regular citizen, you can file your own lawsuit. Why is Trump creating a special pathway for his allies?
Well, they've done their homework, and I'm not saying it is right. I'm not saying it's correct. I don't know all the legalities behind it. But their argument is that this is very similar to an Obama-era fund that was created for Native American farmers.
How is it very similar to that?
I said their argument. I didn't say I agree. I said their argument.
The structure
I'm telling
of the
you
fund
what's
is
in
the same
the
as Obama,
reporting.
right.
But they've
Guys.
clearly they've done enough homework to say, hey, this will be our case if it ends up going to court. Then courts will decide whether it's right or wrong.
I think every Republican in America needs to be asked, do you think that our tax dollars should go to pay off Donald Trump's political grievances? They shouldn't, period.
Please like, subscribe, and share. This exchange highlights a much bigger constitutional issue that often gets lost in political debates: how taxpayer money can legally be distributed. Under the Appropriations Clause of the U.S. Constitution, federal spending usually requires congressional approval. That is why most compensation programs in American history, whether for veterans, terror victims, or wrongful imprisonment, were created through legislation rather than direct executive action. Critics argue that this proposal raises serious separation of powers concerns because it appears to rely heavily on executive discretion instead of independent oversight. In past compensation
Remedies for
programs,
wrongful prosecution
eligibility
through
rules
civil
were tightly
rights
defined
lawsuits
and
federal
reviewed
court
by
claims,
neutral boards
where judges
that
and courts
prevent
decide
political
compensation.
There is
instead of
also a
political
fairness
figures.
issue.
The
Creating
legal
a separate
system
system tied
provides
to presidential determinations could bypass long-standing legal safeguards designed to keep justice neutral. Public trust is another major factor. Research has consistently shown that government compensation programs lose credibility when people believe benefits are connected to political loyalty rather than objective harm. That is why critics say the real issue is not just politics, but process and oversight. Without congressional authorization, transparent standards, and independent review, a fund like this would likely face immediate constitutional challenges and intense court scrutiny. At the end of the day, many Americans believe public money should follow the same legal standards for everyone, regardless of political affiliation. Pause for a moment. Are you tired of getting only half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing while another says the complete opposite. That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how left, right, and center media outlets cover the same story, so you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Please like, subscribe, and share.